do we know? Cool. Hey everyone, I think we are live now. Welcome to the Avalanche Developer Community Update Call. Those of you who have been around the community for a long time probably remember we used to do these on a semi-regular basis, but for the past 9 months or so, the team has really been heads down, focused on implementing and shipping the past few upgrades with the Etna and Fortuna upgrades. But now we wanted to get back to it, really give you guys an insight as to what our current focuses are, all of the progress we've made in the past 9 months, and all that we're excited for in the next 3 to 6 months here in the second half of the year, as far as creating the fastest EVM chain on the C chain. So to kick us off on this call, we have Stephen, Austin, and Meg. We're going to be talking mostly about the ACP 176 changes that went live on Avalanche mainnet back in April in the Avalanche Octane upgrade. I think it was a huge improvement in of itself, but also set the C chain up for a lot of future improvements in the second half of the year. So we're excited to kind of unpack that, make sure we have a solid foundation about what was included in Octane and 176, so that when we get to those upcoming upgrades with streaming asynchronous execution and the Firewood database, we have a solid foundation to build on. Yeah, so I guess to jump right in, Stephen, I think one of the main focus points that people latched in on for the 176 upgrade was the reduction in the minimum base fee, because they noticed cheaper transaction fees, but there were a lot of other subtle changes packed in there. Would you mind giving us a refresher on what those are, and we can go from there?
Yeah, so I was really excited about 176 while we were working on it. Prior to 176, the C chain did have dynamic fees, but it was really a mechanism that I was not particularly happy with. I felt like it was very hard to kind of model and understand. And while it did work, it did prevent, any DOS, denial of service attacks against the chain, so it was just very kind of clunky, right? So specifically, we had noticed with the fee mechanism prior to 176 that we would have very spiky fee increases. So fees would increase very rapidly, and sometimes it would take a very long time for it to fall back down. And while that's not necessarily indicative of an issue, because sometimes that's just how demand works. Sometimes, you have some NFT drop and a huge demand spike comes up, and then you have a slow kind of decay down. We really felt like it was kind of an artifact of the fee mechanism more than the actual demand itself. So 176 targeted kind of improving the fee dynamics for the C chain by kind of more concisely and I would say kind of mathematically describing the price increases, the price decreases, the rate at which those changes happen, and things like that. So from that perspective, I was very excited about 176. But one of the things that 176 also included was the ability to change the target dynamically. So in the past with 176, we prior to 176, we had kind of always had this target gas consumed in the code. And in order to change that, you had to have an actual network upgrade to change that target. And inside of 176, in addition to the price changing mechanism, we also changed it so that validators had the ability to vote on whether or not to increase or decrease the gas target. So really, 176 was a total rehaul of the C chain fee dynamics and gas target pricing. So gas target setting. So yeah, the min base fee was effectively removed. So now it was a full kind of market where you could just supply will always hit demand essentially, regardless of what that clearing price is. So in the past we had set minimum prices for gas to be some number in the code that we felt was was reasonable. And with this change, we kind of fully said, we're just going to completely let the markets decide. We're going to let the validators decide. And, essentially like the ACP process should not be like dictating like fee minutia. So that was really kind of the whole idea and goal for 176. And I feel like I have been extremely happy with kind of the result of that. So I don't know, Austin, if you want to talk a little bit about the kind of simulations that we did and played around with 176 prior to activation. But yeah.
Yeah, sure. Right as soon as Steven came to me with this idea, we started looking at the history specifically to see what might have gone wrong in the past. And I mean, this first graph is from one specific day where Steven said, like the fee might spike really, really high and then not come down for no apparent reason. And it was just a relic of this of the EIP that this was based off. So in blue, you can see that the base fee that we recorded during some high use day. And then in orange is what would have been the fee with the same demand in our new mechanism. And you can see it spikes very similarly, but then it comes right back down once the demand stabilized. And there's another important thing to note here. This is the y-axis is log scaled. So the difference immediately after these spikes is huge, orders of magnitude. So this is clearly a very huge improvement on our fees, where it can go back down to essentially zero right away, which is really awesome. There's there is like here you can see not log scaled, and it's a little more apparent how big the difference is.
Yeah, it's something that you probably don't notice in the day-to-day as a user of the chain, right? Like if you're using the chain, you just expect it to be performant and you expect your transactions to be included, and kind of the lack of this spiky behavior isn't something you necessarily are thinking about because ideally it would never have occurred in the past, right? But avoiding those bad situations is almost just as important as keeping the price down at lower levels at the steady state.
I think that this visualization on Dune is super like indicative of how well the mechanism is working, because you can see from before Octane how spiky and reactive the pricing was. And then as soon as activation happens, after a little bit of like what seems to be some settling noise, like the consistent average gas per second was basically a straight line, which there were some instances, which is very normal on blockchains, to see periods of high activity where the price does fluctuate, but otherwise it's really hitting that target that, as Stephen mentioned, is set as a default, but the validators can vote on. I think some people, Stephen, have been kind of confused by the way that we call it voting, because what it is essentially just a validator configuration. But could you just explain for the general validator audience, like what the setting is actually doing when that validator goes to build a block?
Yeah. Before I do that, I do want to comment on this graph because I do love this graph. So it is the biggest difference in this graph from the prior mechanism to the new mechanism is you'll see that it very consistently hits what the target is, right? So we can see the point at which 176 activated is very kind of clear in this graph. And the biggest reason why, like, while the fee spikes are certainly much less in 176 world, the actual biggest reason why we hit the target like perfectly is the removal of the overly high min base fee, right? So you can see, if you look back, there's like a period towards the end of February 2025 where we actually do kind of hit the target for a little while. And then we kind of go back down into this like really kind of up and down world. And I guess maybe it's the beginning of, yeah, right there. So yeah, so what the previous mechanism did is it still kind of hit target, like it wasn't completely missing target. But if the minimum price was higher than what the like clearing price was, then you would be underutilizing the chain, right? So even though we had kind of been doing like benchmarks of, okay, like we feel good at this like level of throughput and yada yada yada, we weren't actually hitting that level of throughput consistently, right? So like it doesn't really matter what optimizations you do, what database improvements you do, like if you aren't consistently hitting the target, then like you're just not using the gas that the validators are able to supply. So that was a big reason why I advocated a lot for essentially the removal of the min price.
It was
And so I'm really what?
Oh,
Sorry.
it went from 1 nanovox to 1. What is it? I don't even know the term.
Auto.
One
Auto
way.
box.
One, I think way is probably the term that.
Yeah, and a way. Yeah, it went from one way to one way, so big diff. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't. Yeah, and it doesn't really need to be one way, right? Like it could be higher, and it would still kind of meet this reality. Like I think the minimum fee that we have seen since 176 activated, ignoring the initial ramp up, is probably like a tenth of a nanovox or something. So you could increase the minimum probably quite substantially, and it would still very consistently hit target. But there's really no good reason why you would set that rather than an auto box or a way. But yeah, so as far as the validators voting, so in this graph, we can see here there are periods of times where the gas target or the gas usage goes up quite discreetly, right? So the way that the voting mechanism works is whenever a validator proposes a block, they have the right to change the gas target by some relatively small amount. And so essentially you can imagine multiply it by like 1% up or 1% down. You can imagine it that way. And so the way that nodes by default are configured is to essentially abstain from this voting. So this was a conversation that we had during the 176 community call about kind of how should this default behavior work. And it was kind of decided that we would have validators abstain from voting if they don't set this config. So I would expect a large number of validators do abstain. And that's their right. They don't have to set the config. But if a validator does set the config, then they will essentially, whenever they propose a block, they will push the target towards whatever gas target they want the chain to be at, right? So at the end of the day, the way that this mechanism works is of the group of people that aren't abstaining, so of the group of people that are actually configured a target, the median target of those will eventually get hit just by the continuous voting process. This is also weighted by stake because block production is weighted by stake. So the median of those values will eventually get hit, and the number of nodes that are voting will essentially impact the speed at which it is hit, right? So if everybody is saying increase the price, or sorry, increase the target, the target will just immediately, or not immediately, but it will very quickly go right to that point. If like everybody abstains, but only one person is saying to increase the target, then it will slowly go up because again, the median is still increasing or set to increase.
So are you setting your config for your desired target, or are you setting it with some value that gets factored in, like to try to adjust that?
So,
because you're saying it's like it's part of an equation that at time of block building gets calculated for the next gas target. You're not just like switching, like you're not just hard coding your desired gas target value.
Well, you're
But
not
you're building that
but in your node config, you get to set your target gas value per it's either 1 second or 10 seconds. So you have to factor in that
10 seconds, I believe.
10 seconds. Cool.
No,
I
it's,
lied.
it looks like it's 1. Yeah.
It's 1 per second. Target per second. Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah, do you specify the target or the maximum capacity? It's the target, I would believe. So you specify the amount of gas that you as validator would prefer to be seen targeted per second. And then when you propose a block, this is actually specified in the ACP, if we could pull that back up, Kyle. Your node calculates, okay, the current gas target is, say, 1 million per second. I preference 5 million per second, but as Stephen said, you can only change it an incremental amount per block built. So based on your preference, Avalanche actually really Core ETH, I think, automatically calculates what the maximum or minimum value that you can change it to for that block is. And the network validates that the value you set is within the proposed or is within the allowed range. But as long as it's within that allowed range, that is valid to be accepted and then enacted by the network immediately. And I think one thing that I actually learned through the process of writing ACP 176, because it's mostly Stephen's ideas, was the inaccuracy of the EIP 1559 target mechanism. Stephen said you can imagine it as being 1% up or 1% down every time you build a block, but it's actually an exponential to allow for it to increase and decrease proportionally.
Yeah, so the 1559 mechanism, which they use for both the gas target and the gas price, it includes like a fixed multiplier up, multiplier down. So you can imagine, well, if you can allow like a 50% increase or a 50% decrease, that isn't actually symmetric, right? A very clear example is, well, imagine you allow 100% increase, so it doubles, but 100% decrease goes to 0, right? So like, just because it's the percentages of increases and decreases are equal, it doesn't actually like result in like a symmetric kind of behavior. So
this
so yeah,
was
you can
a real clear visualization of that. This was at a time when the gas price was above the minimum prior to Fortuna, so we were hitting the target, but the target was 1.5, which is this orange line, and we were clearly kind of plateaued above the actual target because of the fact that whenever it increases, it's stepping up high.
Yeah, so in this case, it's the price is what is impacting the usage, right? So if you do like say a 10% increase and then a 10% decrease, you've actually decreased more. You aren't back to where you began. So this mechanism will systemically kind of set the price to be too low. And when you set the price to be too low, that means that there will be more usage than you actually want. And so that's how the usage is kind of stable above what the target usage actually is. So so yeah, this is this is fixed in the 176 stuff. I'm not going to claim to have come up with all of this stuff. This is definitely heavily based on EIP 4844's pricing mechanism, but with some essentially modifications for a different block building cadence, and also like with including the support for validators to vote on the changing target. But yeah, so at the end of the day, for validators to impact what the gas target is on the C chain, all people need to do is set the gas target config on the C chain to whatever target per second they want to have hit. So currently the C chain is targeting 2 million gas per second. If some validator out there says this is ridiculous, we need to increase the target, I want to increase it to 3 million gas per second, they can just go into the C chain config, put 3 million as the gas target, and then whenever their node proposes a block, they will push the target towards 3 million. Now, that is not to say that the target will immediately move there, there must be some rough consensus of the validators to do that target change. So we actually see a very similar mechanism happening right now on Ethereum. I think their validators just coordinated to update their target, or I guess their gas limit, to 45 million gas per block. This is not necessarily completely unique to us. The math is maybe different. The specific configs and stuff like that is different. But at the end of the day, like the validators can kind of come together and impact this process. So if validators want to increase the gas target, they can do so. If they want to decrease the gas target, they can also do so. And the reason validators may actually want to decrease the gas target is if they feel like the network is running too hot for their kind of machines, right? So this gas target ends up finding where the kind of median point is of validators. So that's how this kind of mechanism is designed. Yeah.
Would definitely love to see more validators set their preference based on how flat it is stayed. It definitely seems that not too many have set their preference and are currently just abstaining based on whatever the rest of the nodes in the network are saying. But
Yeah, for sure.
do you want to talk about the increases from 1.6 to 2 that we see on the graph here?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was gonna actually ask about that next. I just wanted to close the door because there was some construction outside. But yeah, it almost looks like a step function started happening to the gas per second in June, just increasing what looks to be like 0.1 million. I do know why that happened, but I wanted to pose the question to Stephen and to Austin to say what maybe the motivation was, or why is that happening, and how do we feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big reasons that we added this voting mechanism is because we didn't have a good understanding of what the chain could actually run at. We picked a number, 1.5 million gas per second, and then occasionally during network upgrades have bumped it up a little bit. But it's really hard to know what you can do without testing it a little bit. So very incremental upgrades, like 0.1 million at a time, as we can see that the network stayed in consensus. Our nodes, like the Avalanche Foundation's nodes, haven't had any issues along the way. So you can see that these upgrades have just allowed more people to issue transactions than before.
Yeah, and one thing as well with increasing the target is it is very unclear what that does to the gas price. So certainly increasing the target will decrease the gas price. If you increase supply and demand is allegedly staying the same, right? Then you're going to have a clearing price that's lower, right? Now, how much the price decreases versus how much the target increases is a very interesting kind of question, right? And so you don't necessarily need to get the price down to the floor, right? Like you want to have cheap transactions. But you also don't want to issue yourself up or like expose yourself to just kind of needless spam as well, right? So the reason these fees exist is to prevent spam and allow like users to interact on chain without too much headache. So in addition to the validators like needing to obviously stay in consensus and keep like voting well and like being timely, there's also kind of like, well, how much does increasing this target actually like impact end users, right? And so these are the kind of like things that we have been kind of talking about and experimenting with, and so that was kind of part of what is going into us having some of the kind of foundation nodes increase their gas target. So so that is very explicitly what is happening and why these targets have changed is that the foundation nodes have kind of updated their targets to increase the gas target per second. Not massively, right? Like we don't want to just like gap this thing up and see like, all right, let's see like what the network can do. I think that we, while we don't necessarily know what the validator hardware specs exist out there. We do know what core ETH and subnet EVM and our EVM implementations can do in more of a kind of sanitary environment. So I think that we're quite confident in the network's ability to increase the target from what was 1.6 to 2. But it's all about like measured incremental updates and kind of like make a change, measure, make sure everything is like good and continue going. I do want to stress again that this is not like something that like the Avalanche Foundation is privileged in doing. Literally any validator can do this. This is just something that we have been doing recently, primarily because I think a lot of validators don't actually set their targets. So
Yeah, I actually did a little preliminary data pulling just on Dune. If you can switch to the screen I'm sharing, Kyle, just to see what the median gas cost specifically would look like, or what it was averaging per period of time when the target gas per second was set. And it is pretty clear that raising the target gas per second does decrease the median gas cost. It went like, this is in USD, not in a box necessarily. So it went from, obviously all of these numbers are very low. Like this is less than a cent here, but it went from 27 thousandths of a dollar to 3 thousandths of a dollar. So that's a pretty substantial decrease. And the average transactions per hour has consistently been higher than it has been when the gas per second target was set lower. So that's really cool to see just after a few weeks of testing. And then
And also
throughout,
the Vox burned, I think on the bottom of this is a very cool dynamic to see. Not only do those transactions per second or transactions per day in this case have a substantial tick up, but also the total amount of a Vox that those transactions are burning is also on the whole increased. So even though each individual transaction is paying a smaller fee, which means less of Vox burned for that single transaction, on the whole, the network is burning more Vox as the usage increases. I don't think this is where it starts to get a bit more fuzzy for me of like, obviously the higher you set the gas target, now that we have a mechanism that very consistently hits that target, the more transactions that you'd expect to see, assuming the average gas used per transaction stays relatively constant, which might not be a good assumption. But on the whole, the higher the gas target, the higher the TPS, and the lower the transaction fees. But the Vox burned cumulatively is definitely there's so many factors that play into it that it's great to see that it's increased, and hopefully we can continue driving further adoption of the chain such that as these transaction fees get lower and lower and more users come, we see just a cycle, flywheel effect there.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables that go into measuring like a live system like this. So the target, as the target gas is increasing, we have this great graph that like the median price is decreasing. I'm half expecting at some point we're going to increase it and it's going to just rip up, and that can happen just because the demand on the network is shifting as well, right? So we don't necessarily expect to see like, oh, you increase supply, like the gas price just always goes down. The reality is that the demand and the supply end up impacting the price, and the demand is completely user traffic driven, right? So one thing that I have been very excited about now that we are consistently hitting target, which means that we are processing more transactions than we were prior, is it makes the chain feel a little bit more alive. There are like periods in the past where it's like, oh yeah, like nothing's happening because like the price is just set too high, right? And there isn't that demand to meet that supply. But now it's like there's always something consistently happening on chain, whether it's just like Trader Joe arbs, right? Like those will always be there. Prices always fluctuate, and people will always like fill that demand. But yeah, like it makes the chain feel like more like active, which hopefully in the long term, right, like provides that like flywheel of like, okay, yeah, like chain's active, things are going, like, okay, now we add some new like financial instrument, yada yada yada, and you get that flywheel that Michael was talking about before. So
yeah, for sure. It seems like when there's more activity too, like there's just more information for us to work off of how we can further improve things too, right? Like if we hadn't lowered the min base fee to what it is now, and if we hadn't adjusted the gas target higher to allow for more activity, like we never would know about maybe some other issues that could be attained to. But speaking of which, when there were directly after Octane activities of or periods of very high activity on C chain, the new mechanism did provide this new interesting quirk where because there was a max gas per 10-second period that was basically set to 15 million, when it was just ripping, it seemed that blocks per second could only be built with a max capacity of 3.2 million gas, which proved difficult for any protocol or any user who was trying to broadcast a transaction with a gas limit or a gas used like above that number. Basically, it seemed like we were seeing users experiencing periods of times where their transactions couldn't land in a block purely because they were bigger than the max block size. So, do you want to talk about that, Stephen?
Yeah, this was, I think I would describe as an oversight. So not ideal. So the way that the mechanism works is you have some target that you're trying to hit, and you, in addition to that target amount of gas to be consumed per second, we also have a maximum gas consumed per second, right? So currently, the target is 2 million gas per second. The maximum is 4 million gas per second. So no matter what the chain wants to do, no matter how much users are willing to pay, it will not exceed 4 million gas per second. And the reason for that is to just provide bounds, make sure that users can't DOS the network, right? So like if some guy has a bunch of money, he shouldn't be able to just send a ton of transactions and crash the network, right? So there are hard rate limits in addition to these softer price related rate limits, right? And these interact. Now, the thing that comes out of that is, well, if people are overusing gas compared to the target, then they're going to say be using, say, 3 million, 4 million gas per second, right? And if that is happening, that hard limit will start kicking in, right? And say, no, like you can't issue more transactions now because there just isn't sufficient gas. But the way that that mechanism was implemented, if the price was, significantly increasing for gas because people were overutilizing it, the chain would advance, say, 1 second, and only in this case now 4 million gas would get added to this available kind of pool of gas to consume. And then, say 4 million gas, like some transaction consumes 4 million gas and depletes that. If you had a transaction that used a gas limit of 5 million, that transaction could just never get in if you were consistently having people consume that 4 million of gas that's getting added every second. So this wasn't really deemed a major concern. Like this mechanism was understood, but like, we didn't really deem it a major concern because it was like, well, this is only happening when the price is, the gas price is doubling every minute, right? So it's like, okay, like the price can't double every minute for like that long, right? It's just, the price will double and then we'll hit target again. And that's how the mechanism is supposed to work. But what we didn't, really fully think through is the fact that, well, during that doubling process, any transaction that is consuming more than what the current capacity allows is just not allowed in regardless of how much they pay. And so this kind of broke the assumption that like, you can increase the tip and you'll like always be able to get in, right? Like that 5 million gas limit transaction, regardless of what tip they provided, just could not get in. And so there were a couple people that kind of realized that and reached out to us saying like, hey, like this is happening and this is a problem for us. And so we updated ACP 176 very slightly, so you can see there's now kind of like a footnote, I think was the last modification of 176, which recommends a little bit friendlier block building mechanism. So what the block building mechanism does is it delays block building until there is a sufficient capacity to have a proper auction for the gas. So now rather than just, when 4 million gas gets added, rather than the block builders immediately consuming that, the Avalanche Go block building mechanism was modified such that it would wait until there was a sufficient capacity stored up so that it could have a proper bid using tips for that available capacity. And it was configured to match the prior maximum gas limit prior to the ACP 176 activation. So this was a bit of an oversight. Definitely wasn't like intended. But
Wait,
I
it
think
was set to match prior to Octane, but I thought that the max or like the minimum available capacity per second would be 12.8, not per second, sorry, per block building period.
So this is a good question. So prior to 176, we had a gas target of 1.5 million gas per second, which correlated to 15 million gas per 10 seconds, which was the gas limit of the block, right? So each block prior to 176 had a 15 million gas limit, which meant that transactions could have up to a 15 million gas limit. At the time that this was happening, 176 was currently targeting 1.6 million gas. And so that meant that we were, rather than adding the 4 million capacity per second that we are now, we were adding 3.2 million capacity per second. And so the maximum amount that the block builders could kind of attempt to guarantee was what was it, 12.8, 16 minus, yeah, 12.8 million gas per second was like the max that they could kind of wait to provide for a betting pool. Now that the target has increased, I believe that the target is at that 15, or the minimum stored capacity is at that 15 million limit. So it behaves, now that the target has increased, the same as it did prior to
I see.
176. So transactions using up to 15 million gas should be able to consistently bid with the priority tip for that. Yeah.
And this is just a block building logic change, which I think is an important distinction here. It's not a network upgrade at all, or something that's required by the network, right? So it's not enforced necessarily that you will always get 15 million, depending on who's building the block, but block builders can choose to include transactions up to that amount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think something important to note too is like when the block building logic was changed, 99.8% of transactions on the C chain had a gas limit lower than that 12.8 maximum waiting period. So it was like I think the settings were like set so that basically the chain could behave the way that it had before the upgrade.
Yeah.
All right, I think we have one more topic that we do want to cover for this before the hour is up. Basically just updates to ACP 176 mechanism to prep for synchronous async execution. Sorry, streaming asynchronous execution. I always get that. So it's a tongue twister for sure. But yeah, can we dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So just to tie in, I think some of the learnings from the 176 mechanism, when working on the async execution work, we were very careful to ensure that this kind of like gas limit mechanism was kind of fully fleshed out, because I would say modifying the block building algorithm is, while potentially effective, not, it doesn't feel great, right? Like you want the actual like behavior enforced on the validators to be, the behavior you want, not necessarily like, oh, like we want nice validators to like provide this betting pool, right? And so this has kind of gone into how we are designing the kind of processing queue in SAE. And so very explicitly, the processing queue for SAE supports essentially adding in up to a full block additional into the queue, right? So if the max queue size, you want it to be say like 2 full blocks, you can actually have the queue flex up to 3 full blocks, but you'll only be able to add a new like transaction once you get less than 2 full blocks in the queue, right? And so that that mechanism doesn't impact the analysis of like worst case price fluctuations, but it ensures that whenever a block is added, it always has the full block gas limit, right? So as part of the ASIC execution, we're definitely kind of like learning from this experience with 176 and making sure to kind of fully cater to that in that mechanism. So yeah, I think that's kind of the big takeaway from the 176 upgrade for me with SAE. But yeah.
Just allowing for any potentially like large transactions that like allowing for all activity that has happened in the past. Maybe not all, but 99.8% of it. Like, let's make sure that we cover all of the existing use cases so that apps that already run on C chain don't get affected, but help increase the capacity and the throughput of the chain. Obviously, streaming async X is something entirely new that'll be introduced to the C chain. So there will probably be a lot of unknowns, but at least we can take what we learned from the dynamic fee mechanism and apply it to this as well.
And ultimately, I think we want the gas target to be high enough such that we're adding 16 million per second. So the previous behavior is available, but for any block, even if it is just 1 second after. So there's a way out of this, and it's forwards by increasing the gas target further, or by shipping upgrades that allow us to be confident in increasing the gas target further.
Yeah, most of the EVM team is working on making huge improvements, even besides the asynchronous execution. We're shipping a new database. There's more things in the works. I mean, that is the big point of this ACP, right? Was to be able to easily change the target. As we make incremental improvements, we can very quickly allow more. As a network, we can allow more transactions to be issued and processed, which is really awesome.
Absolutely. I think that's one point I definitely wanted to emphasize today, because I felt like there's a lot of focus on like the cheaper transaction fees, but actually being able to crank the network further at the validator's preferences is, in my mind, an equally big unlock, particularly as we're looking ahead here towards SIE, towards the Firewood database, and towards all the other future improvements that we have planned for the EVM. I think it's been a very exciting past 6 months, the first half of the year internally, because we've had all these ideas, and we're now hoping to talk about them more publicly, and as we get closer and closer to shipping them. Super excited to see that. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it. We're talking now about like, oh, just set this config and we'll if enough validators do it, we'll push the gas target higher and we'll see higher TPS and number go up. There was a lot of work that went into, one, making that possible, but two, also monitoring the safety of that. Like the network can only process so many transactions per second, and putting us in a position to find out what that number is by playing around with these targets with the validators and with the rest of the community is an iterative process that we, I think, have made a lot of progress in and have a lot of progress yet to be made in. So excited for those to come. Anything else that you all wanted to add before we wrap this up? I think covered a lot of 176 and hopefully set the foundation for SAE, Firewood. We're definitely planning on having Martin Eckert and his team come in and talk about projects on the developer relations side. There's a lot going on in the ecosystem as a whole that we really want to strive to highlight a bit more going forward. So anything you want to hear about, definitely feel free to let us know. Any questions that you have, feel free to tag us on Twitter or on Discord or Telegram. Meg, I know you're on all of those far more so than I am. And appreciate
Yes. No, it's great. I love hearing from people directly. So please take Michael's advice. And if there's anything that bothers you, you can just let me know. I think overall, all of these updates are super exciting because it kind of just goes to building our blockchain as a really good basis for like real life applications. If the responses, if transactions can land faster and like the responses you get can just be more snappy, then like it really does lay a good foundation for like real world applications, as like users will see less friction and people can rely more on the blockchain itself for providing whatever they need for their application, whether it's just state update changes or storing values, like truly using the blockchain as your database or your network that you need. So interacting with other apps. All this is super exciting. I'm really excited to have this discussion be something that's more regular. Also, for our sake, just hearing from other parts of our team and other parts of Ava Labs, and hopefully getting some community members on in the future as well. So,
absolutely. All right, I think we'll wrap it up there. If you've made it this long, thanks a bunch for watching. Or excited for to get this series re-going and up to speed. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
thanks.
Thanks.